You look beautiful. Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt, and welcome to LitFic, our brand new program. It's kind of an offshoot of Frontliners, where we get to talk to literary writers we love, and they get to talk to you. And as you know, Mighty Blaze is the initiative that was started right after the pandemic to help independent bookstores, authors, and readers. So today is really special for me because we have Gina Sorell with this incredible book, The Wise Women. And I want to tell you why this is so special for me. I met Gina years ago. She was actually a writer in one of my UCLA classes. And she submitted a book, and I read the first sentence, and I was so gobsmacked that I actually called her and said, you know what, this is a novel. You're the real deal. You are going to be famous. And she said, ha ha ha. But here she is. This is a Good Morning America buzz book. She got a rave in the New York Times, which says Gina Sorell's very entertaining new novel is amazing. The world is funnier and friendlier than our own. I was always happy to return to it, amused by the witty dialogue and disasters, confident that things would work out in the end. The New York Times Book Review. Booklist says a witty novel, a breezy fun read with just enough heft. Publishers Marketplace called it the BuzzBook of Spring Summer. Parade says it's one of the 30 books we can't wait to read in 2022. One of Read with Jenna's most anticipated books of 2022. Kirkus, who generally hates everything, said lots of human complexity. The characters are warm and quirky in an enjoyable way, a fine addition to the collection. And Publishers Weekly said does a fine job describing neighborhoods' tension and the city's real estate. So, The Wise Women, let me show you the gorgeous cover again, is about an advice columnist mom who feels compelled to solve the problems of her grown daughters. Clementine, who discovers that the house she thinks she owns is really a rental thanks to her husband. And Barb, who struggles both with a cheating girlfriend and her own design business. And of course, Wendy, who is the advice columnist who must try to juggle the problems of her daughters. So, I want to welcome Gina. Welcome so much. I'm so thrilled to have you here. It's great.
Thank you so much for having me. And that introduction was just wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, you have my heart. I want to remind everybody Gina's book can be bought at your favorite independent bookstore or at bookshop.org, which we like at a Mighty Blaze, which will direct you to an indie bookstore. And if you have any questions for Gina, pop them in the chat. Okay, so Gina, let's start. I absolutely loved the whole premise of an advice columnist trying to fix her daughter's issues while grappling with her own issues as well. So where did that idea come from, and how much fun was it to write?
This book was so much fun to write, which was really something I needed. I needed to find the fun in the writing again. Like a lot of people, I think writing is challenging for me, like a lot of writers. I have this idea, I want to run with the idea, and then I get stuck, or I get, tied up in it, or I can't see my way forward with it. And, and my first book was so much darker and so much twistier.
Right.
It was so demanding, and that I really wanted to have a good time and to write something really enjoyable. I wanted to write something that I wanted to read, and that I thought that would just, engage and entertain readers and be uplifting and be hopeful. So I started much like you do, thinking about things that obsess me. I'm obsessed with real estate, and I was obsessed with school districting at the time, because my son was going to a new school and trying to figure all that out. And I just, and I kept thinking, I remember during this time just wishing that somebody would give me the answers. Somebody could just say, the way that your mother does when you're younger, hopefully it's all going to work out. And my mother is famous for saying that. It's all going to work out. It's fine. You'll see. And I'm like, based on what? How do you know? But often I'm like, okay, good. Thanks. Yeah, that's what I needed to hear. And then, as I've gotten older, sometimes her advice will be just sometimes very unsolicited advice. And she's the first to admit that. I always tease her that she's like, look, if you want my opinion, and before I can answer, she's there.
Before you can say no.
And I thought, what would that be like if there was somebody who just did that all the time and was really good at it, and then thought they could turn it into a living? So that idea of like needing that advice, wanting someone to reassure us, wanting someone to show us the way, and then also putting that with the mother and making her really meddling is just something that really grew.
I want to talk more about Wendy, who's this wonderful character. She's the advice columnist, but also she is here to sort of represent and talk about ageism, which she does it so brilliantly. Wendy's been aged out of her job, but she refuses to accept that. And we love her for that. In fact, it's her grit that really power drives the book a lot. What I also love is that through Wendy, we get to explore what happens to child-parent relationships when the kids are adults. When do you know if you're helping your adult kids, and when is it meddling? You and I have talked about this a lot because we're both mothers of sons.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my son is 25, so it's a different issue. He's an adult, but your fabulous Grady is still a young boy. So I wanted to know, did your feelings about your growing and amazing son color writing this at all? And if so, how?
Thank you for that. And it did, and you've known me pre-Grady. My son he's young, he's only 10 years old, and he's tremendous, and I adore him. And yeah, he's an only child, and I think that also is a part of the factors into the kind of relationship that we have. He's around adults a lot, he's with me a lot, he's with my husband a lot. And so we have these conversations that are kind of like peer to peer. I mean, of course, within context, I'm not talking about a child, but he just from a very young age is very eloquent, very verbal, and I think, and that's been a real joy, especially being a writer and someone who loves language, to be able to have these conversations early on. But it also means that, that's also a sign of him being a really deep thinker and someone who's very thoughtful. And so, and I know a couple of kids like this, quite a few of my friends have very thoughtful children, and some of them are only children, some of them aren't, but I wanted to sort of explore what that was like. I also was that kind of kid. I worried a lot when I was younger, just pretty much about anything,
Wow.
Yeah, I was really worried. I just worried about stuff. Is that from a very young age? I remember being 7 years old and really concerned about nuclear war and really discussing it with my parents, what was our action plan? And, and just, I guess at the time, maybe you could say that I was anxious. I don't think people called it that then, making myself sound like I'm 200 years old, but I don't think we had the same sort of awareness of it. It was just I was called a worry wart. And I remember my grandmother buying me these little worry dolls that I could put my little worries in, and then put them in the pouch at night and string up the bag and put it aside. But for me, that was also just about being a deeper thinker. And so I wanted to, what was a way that I could frame that and look at that wasn't a negative thing? Like we are all different types of people. I have friends who nothing bothers them. Everything rolls off their back. I don't know how they do it. I'm so glad that they're in my life and that they remind me that things are going to be okay. And there's also other people really think through everything that they're going to say, every word that comes out of their mouth, And so I just wanted to just explore that in a child.
Yeah, I was going to say that Clementine's love for her son was so palpable, and he was so real on the page. And I wanted to know, because I read about boys a lot too because of my son. What part of this came from your love for Grady? Was it conscious or was it unconscious?
Yeah, it was conscious. I think it was
okay.
Conscious. Yeah, I think in some ways, I'm writing the character. I start with something real, like a lot of writers do, like you do as well. We find an inspiration, something that matters to us, and then I try to work at it and push it further and further away from me until I'm really fictionalizing it. That's really important for me to do, or else I'm not going to be able to play with these characters. I'm not going to be able to do things to them if I don't let myself fictionalize them, right? And
right.
So, my kid is, thankfully, he's very engaged. He's got lots of friends. That's not his issue, like it is for Jonah in the book, right? But my protectiveness of him, that how much I care about him, how I would love to get ahead of all the things in his life, much like Wendy. I'd love to sort of know ahead of time to give advice or to sort of prevent anything negative happening. I think that is something that I really have as a parent and share with Clementine.
It's interesting though, because, advice columnists, they give advice and they almost always expect you to take it.
Yeah.
But Grady is this really interesting kid in that he has a mind of his own. He
Yeah.
may just be 10, but he will come out and say these astonishing things that sound like an adult.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that actually figured into creating Wendy as a character, because there is something about, you think you know the right advice, but it's very hard to know what's going on in the person you're advising in their head at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting too, because that advice and giving that advice, that made me think about, as you said, not everyone takes it. So for Wendy, I wanted to, Clementine has this great dialogue with her son and they able to talk to each other. I have a great dialogue with my son. We're able to say, oh, I agree, I don't agree, even though he's so, young. Wendy gives out that advice and Clementine takes it all up. She wants all of it. And Barb says, no, not for me, and I think that happens. And I think that's one of the things that I love exploring are these different relationships that siblings can have with the same
Right.
parent. Those
Right.
relationships are completely unique. They're being raised by the same individual,
True.
but they're having this completely separate experience. And so I thought it'd be really great to give Wendy a daughter who everything that came out of her mouth, she basically, just thought was garbage and outdated, and not for her.
That's incredible. The next thing I want to talk about is gentrification and real estate.
Yeah.
I have seen New York City gentrify so much it drives people out. When
Yeah.
Jeff and I moved to Hoboken, nobody wanted to move here, so you could pick up brownstones for no money whatsoever. And now it's so
You
expensive.
should have gotten a couple, get them to your friends later.
I know what was
You get a
wrong with me.
brownstone. You get a
But
brownstone.
gentrification is also really important in the
Mhm.
Wise Women. Let me
Mhm.
show the gorgeous cover again. It's also about the meaning of home. Like,
Yeah.
what is it? So this is a two-pronged question. The first
Okay.
question I want you to answer is, what does home mean to your characters? And then I want to ask, what does it mean for you? Because you've lived in LA and then Toronto and you now own a home. So talk about that, please.
So, first of all, I wish that I had bought a brownstone a bazillion years ago. But I was a poor theater student living in New York City at the time.
Yeah. Who
Um,
knew?
yeah, no, and I also, I have seen the city in terms of gentrification. I've seen the city change so much. I mean, I was in New York at such a young age, going to theater school. I was 19 years old.
Wow.
I lived in a 6-flight walk up on 77 and Second with a roommate. And it was, it was a 1-bedroom apartment. He lived in the living room. We were great friends from high school. We went to theater school together. And then I had the bedroom, and then we had a rooftop, place that we could retreat to and a fire escape. And it was gorgeous, exposed brick, like, the dream apartment. It was $750.
Oh my God.
And that was a lot of money for us, because that was
Yeah.
most of
That's,
the time,
yeah.
American dollars and the Canadian dollar was terrible. So, but you and I have talked about a bit about this. Like every time I've come back, the city's changing so much and so much. And I remember I had this really long gap, and I was coming back, and you were like, "It's not the same city you went to school."
Right. Right.
And that
Very
was,
different city.
and it's really changing. The last few times that I've been, I've spent most of my time, visiting you in Hoboken or going to Brooklyn or going to Sunnyside, really spending time outside of Manhattan and discovering all these other neighborhoods. But that gentrification, that's something which it does matter to me, because I've always been also on the cusp of being able to get in the market, so we had a little tiny house in Toronto, my husband and I, before we moved to Los Angeles. And we never should have sold it, but we did, to fund that move, and we couldn't even buy that house back from ourselves now. Like, it's just through the roof, and it's like this big, and then going to LA, the same thing. We were sort of on the edge of a good neighborhood, close to one, but like not quite in it, because we didn't have the funds. And that's happening. And I think that's happening to people, unlike, well, unlike other generations before us who like got a house and fixed it up, or people use phrases like it's a starter home. Like this is a good place to start. And then if you have a family, that's like every home is enough.
No.
So I remember people saying that to me and being like, what does that mean? Because I think that is something which we're all facing now. Like, how do you stay? How do you keep it viable? How do you live in the place that you want to work and be a part of and contribute to, when it is becoming so untenable because it's becoming so expensive? And I think that creates a certain kind of anxiety and a kind of stress that we just incorporate into our everyday lives, and also informs the kind of decisions we make, maybe the kind of jobs that we take, the projects we say yes to, the compromises we make in order to stay, right? And so there's a lot of compromises. And for these characters, they're facing that. Barb has this architectural and design firm, and she, is really troubled by the gentrification while at the same time profiting from it. But that pays her bills. What's she going to do? Clementine is in this really great neighborhood, and by living in that neighborhood, her kid gets to go to a great school.
Right.
She's always going to rent there, because she can't afford to get in, even though she thought that she did own.
Right.
And so that level of anxiety is something that was a nice layer to add to all the characters as they worry about making it in the big city. And I think no matter what city you're in, no matter even if you're not in a big city, this idea of like owning, I think so many of us have been taught that means, that's your first step to being settled, to having a home, and I think that a lot of people are learning they have to think differently. Like having a home isn't about owning property. It's about having community and about having places that you're connected to and that you feel that you belong. So in many ways, I was using that as a way to explore this larger theme of belonging and what it means to belong.
Exactly. And you did it beautifully. I mean, I think this is a distinctly modern problem, because at least if you want to live in a city, you have to be willing to be a pioneer in a sort of dangerous or deserted area until it gentrifies its way up. And then a lot of time the community has changed and you don't like it as much anymore. So there's always that issue. So let's talk about your versatility as a writer. You wrote this great essay about how you felt you initially had to write serious books in order to be taken seriously as a writer. This is Mothers and Other Strangers, which is like this amazing, amazing novel. And it's dark. And I want to just read the first sentence. My father proposed to my mother at gunpoint when she was 19. And knowing that she was already pregnant with a dead man's child, she accepted. It's a dark book.
Just a feel-good read of the year.
It's a wonderful book, though. It's an amazing book. The Wise Woman deals with serious issues, but in a way that you just love. So can you talk a little bit more about, the essay and how you got from here to here? What did it feel like? Did it feel like a risk?
It felt like a huge risk. And I think that first book, no one's waiting for your first book, right? I think so. No one was waiting for my first book, like I had all this time. I was able to write it and play with it and think about it and revise it. And years went on, it took me a long time to find an agent. Then it took me a long time to find a publisher. And, it was a real struggle, that book, but it mattered so much to me. It dealt with a lot of things that, a lot of similar themes like identity, belonging, mother-daughter relationships.
Right.
But it also explored, ideas of like, there's also struggle in there and there's loss. It was just a really important that I get that book out on the page, and I love Mothers and Other Strangers, but it wasn't an easy book to write, as you might recall from the bazillion emails that I sent.
We trade pages.
But you should have your own dedicated spam filter just for me. But it was a difficult book to write, and then it was a difficult book to find representation for and to get placement for. But then it was successful. It received praise, which was really nice. It was from a small press, but it got really, really lovely reception. And I was very proud of it and the way that it came out and the way that it launched into the world.
Yeah.
And then I wrote, kind of went on the same line. So I talk about this in the essay a bit. The essay's in Dane magazine. The essay's in Lit Hub. And and I talk about, that I was like, this is what it means. Like, this is what it takes to be a writer. It's going to be hard. It's going to be demanding. It's going to be painful. And this is part of the process. This is how you know you're really doing it, and I wrote another book that I love very much. And it
Me
was,
too.
thank you. Thank
A
you.
fictional life. A
A
fictional
fictional
life.
life. And it was, it's a male protagonist, and it's dealing with, this idea of gatekeepers and who gets to live the life that we want to live. And, and is that access only granted to certain people? And if it is, then what lengths will you go to be able to change your own future? Right. And it has a secret, and there's a tragedy in the past, and this deals with revenge. And, I had a great time with that one, but it was also very painful, very hard, very dark. And it didn't find representation, and that was so painful. As anybody who has written a book that doesn't find a home,
Right.
Or doesn't even find representation. I mean, it's a really painful thing to go through. I mean,
It's terrible.
It's terrible. And there's all of that doubt and all of that. You grieve this thing that you worked on for years.
Right.
And I was doing that. And then, it was just that happened. And then a whole series of things happened, in my life where there was just big changes. I left the company that I was working with for many years. And, my family had all these different crises that they were dealing with. And my mom had to have open heart surgery. And I didn't have it in me to go back into that dark, twisty world. And and one of the things that I talk about in the Lit Hub essay that you mentioned is that, I had always kind of relied on my humor, like my dark sense of humor, to like get me through things, or the gallows humor, to sort of buffer up. And I just didn't have it anymore. And I found myself really looking at books that were uplifting. I didn't even have the space to watch shows that were depressing or that were dark,
Right.
that were going to be buoyant and hopeful and inspirational. And that was sometimes even things that were nonfiction that I would read, or that was reality, like a reality television, like a Chef's Table or something. I needed to be taken out of my world.
Right.
And then it slowly started to translate into me thinking about just what I was enjoying doing. And that was it possible to not also be a consumer of that kind of enjoyment, but also be a creator of that kind of enjoyment. And so I really started to explore this idea of working with humor again, and of dealing with deeper themes, but with a lighter touch.
With a lighter touch, right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and that was, it felt like a huge risk, but at the same time, there wasn't anybody waiting for that book either. So I could just.
Yeah, but let's talk about what happened next, which was astonishing. You moved from a small press to Harper freaking Collins. You moved from an okay agent to one of the top agents in New York City. What did that feel like? Did you feel like you were Alice in Wonderland?
Well,
I mean, and she sold your book like right away.
No, I felt really, really fortunate. I mean, honestly, to my former agent, she was a great agent. She really was. The book just wasn't for her. Like everybody,
Right.
I felt like that was one of those, and it's funny, I wanted to put that in the book too. Like, where do you go with those feelings? Just before I answer that question, like, where do you go with those feelings when you feel like, hey, but what about me? I'm over here, but everybody is just doing what's right for them. My former agent was like, this is my list. I don't do this kind of thing that you're now exploring, and that publishing house was also like, they were doing something different. And then
right.
So everybody needed to kind of do what was right for them. It just meant that I was left kind of alone. So, that's hard. Like, what do you do with those feelings of when it's just people move on, because
you moved on, you kept going. You kept going. And that is so incredibly inspiring because, there are so many writers who are struggling, who are getting rejections, and then they look and they see that some books that, maybe they don't love are getting sold, and books that they do love are not getting sold. And I think it's really important for writers to know that it's all about timing. It's all about hooking to the right person. It's all about that stuff. I mean, look, my ninth novel's Pictures of You was rejected on contract by a major publisher as not being special. And I was sure my career was over.
Yeah.
And then a friend got me to Algonquin. They picked it up, and that not special, boring book became a New York Times bestseller.
Right.
Its second week out. So, Gina, so if you had to give one piece of advice to all the writers out there who might be struggling with rejections or whatever, what would you say?
I would say it's not personal. Like
Right.
that's the hard thing, like my previous decision with my previous representation, it's not personal. A publisher that passes on your book, that's not personal. It feels personal. It feels
Right.
personal. But unless it's about the work, and nobody after, I should stress that nobody at that point with a fictional hood life had said, I don't like the writing, or the writing's not good enough.
That's right.
They were just like, it's not for me. And it's honestly one of the most annoying things to hear, because it feels it feels like it's a lie. But it's true. It's just, think of the amount of times that you walk into a bookstore and you look at all the books on the table and then think, I'm not really sure there's anything for me today. And then you discover one book at the end. Well, how many have you passed? Hundreds? Or the amount of times, we pick up the remote control and we're looking for something and like go through 100 shows on Netflix, Apple Plus, and we're just like, I can't find anything I want to watch today. Like these things shift, right? They really shift. So I would say, yeah, don't take it personally. And in terms of moving to HarperCollins and my agent, I feel really, really lucky. I feel like I have this incredible dream team of wise women, who are really making sure that this book gets out into the world in the best possible way. I'm really, really fortunate.
It's great. It's great. I want to talk about how you were an actress, and anybody who wants to see Gina act, you should go look for the waitress scene on YouTube of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days with Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey, because Gina has tattoos and she gets to say, do I look like somebody who cares about football? So anyway, I want to ask, what's the difference between creating a character when you were an actress and creating a character as a novelist?
That's a great question. I think, nobody gets to see your backstory when you're an actor, right? You bring it with you to the role, you bring it with you to the scene. But especially as a character actor, which I was, meaning I'm supporting other leads, is no one's really interested in all the ins and outs of my character. I'm not getting flashbacks, right? I'm not getting montages of what it was like growing up somewhere. Those are for the leads, right? So but it's still important to have that so that you don't show up on set with a two-dimensional performance. The nice thing is that when I'm writing, I get to take all of that information and I get to put it on the page in bits of pieces that I feel like, I'm used to doing that work. I'm used to fleshing out those characters. I'm used to knowing that we're only going to see the person in that moment, in that essence. Like all that information is background that fills them out, that makes them whole. It's still necessary. So I still do that kind of work without worrying like, oh, am I going to use this? Is this wasted? Like it's not wasted. It's going to make these characters richer so that when they have a turn of phrase or they have an interaction or they have a response, you're like, oh, I learned so much about that person in that moment, in this exchange, because they arrive full.
Do you read your work out loud the way you might if you were an actress in terms of dialogue?
For this one, I did.
You did?
For this one, I did.
Great.
Yeah. I didn't, but for this one, I did. Yeah.
Can you show us your wall? The one where you have your novel mapped out? Gina and I talk a whole lot about process and structure, and she showed me her wall before, and I thought, I'm going to try that. And these are all my index cards. Thanks.
Oh, you got the colors.
Yeah, and I have to put them up on my closet. I haven't done that yet. But Gina, do you mind showing us your wall? Nobody can see what it is, what the writing is, but they can see. Okay, tell us about that, because that's really interesting.
So what I've done is I have those cue cards, but my handwriting is like, it's a disaster. It's like chicken scratching. Like I can't what it is afterward. And then I keep adding more to it. So my cards got bigger. So it got to where I started out with normal size cards and my cards got bigger. And then I'm like, there's not enough space. So then I wanted to, this is once I'm working with it. This is the first time I'm really sort of working with the Wise Woman. I was writing and outlining. and then I really was able to outline once I had like a draft, but I did way, way more outlining than I have ever done. Like once I was at a certain point through, and now I decided to try going synopsis, outline, first 2 chapters, see if I have all that tone and everything in place. And so I have done what I would do in cue cards. I've typed it all up just because my handwriting's atrocious. And then I've created all these beats for the book. And then I've gone and I've cut them all into strips of paper and placed them into like an Act 1, an Act 2A, Act 2B, 3 structure. And I realized certain beats, they'll stack underneath each other. They'll make one chapter. And I'm able to sort of move things around. So I'm really just putting like Scotch tape on the walls. And then that big green piece is to separate the acts. And that's painter's tape because that won't pull off the paint.
It's brilliant. It's such a great idea.
It's not even the full 2. That's just most of Act 2A. So I'm keeping going. And then in front of me, I've got another project that I'm working on that's on a whiteboard with the cue cards, and then I draw on it. So yeah. I look like I'm tracking some kind of criminal mastermind.
You are. So you have all sorts of jobs. What I want to know is, how do you juggle being a working mom? I mean, you're a professional namer. You have your own company, Words Make the Brand. You work for Reedsy doing manuscript development. You have to read my pages.
That's not work.
What lessons do you want to impart to your son about how to be a working, successful person in the world?
That's a great question. I think if anything, I want to impart to him that it's important to not work so much as well, because he's like me. Like he is, he's driven, and he sees how hard that I work. And it's one of the things that he's taken to saying to me, like, don't work so hard, Mom, make sure you take a break. And I don't want to think that I only live in this office, right? But I do, so I'm trying to find ways that I can still just be just present, even if it's not doing something. That's always been a challenge for me, just to be, not just to do. And so, I make sure that I spend time in the morning with him over breakfast before he goes to school, which means then that I get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to write. So I get a chunk of time in, then I have time with him. Then when he's at school, I write, I work, I do all those other jobs, right? And then I'm trying really hard just not to work at night. So that's challenging. I always write one day on the weekend, but I do like when he's doing something like gaming with friends,
right,
or out, like I try to do that kind of thing. I think I want him to know that it takes a lot of work and that it's also okay to fail. I talk as much about my failures or my challenges as I do about the success. This has been a really, really exciting week around here. He is really thrilled for me. He knows that he watched me struggle. He knows what the disappointment looks like. So he's open for me, which is wonderful. And I try to keep it in perspective. I make jokes and I say things like, look at that, Grady, overnight success, 13 years, and, and he thinks that's absolutely hilarious, right? So he's like, but it was worth it, Mom. You liked it. You stuck with it.
He's so thoughtful. He's such an amazing. I just have to say one thing that, I always bring up to Gina. When Grady was 5, I used to have Zoom talks with him. And the proudest moment of and I had never actually met him, but the proudest moment of my life was when Grady considered me another 5-year-old and he invited me to his birthday party in Canada. How cool is that? What kind of kid does that?
What I love is that he didn't understand why I was like, oh, she might not be able to come.
Okay, so tell us about your candy drawer and how it keeps you growing. Show it to us.
So this is really, I didn't know you were going to ask me, so let's just see. I look like, this looks really problematic. There's another really big one in here. Oh, here we go. So.
Wow, that's a lot. I thought you were going to show like little things.
No. So this is this company called Swish. I'm not getting paid. They're from Canada and they're vegan gummies.
You gave me some of those. Those are delicious.
All these little samples. And then I always have this same thing, this licorice. And,
oh my God.
And this is more, vegan gummies. And I always snack on candy. Like I have candy, like not all day long, but about 3 o'clock, I'm like, I need a little something. And I drink far too much coffee. I keep a thermos on my desk that is full. I have about like 3 thermoses full. I don't have it with me here.
Wow.
Gave me. Yeah. And that's part of also how I, keep at it. It's so funny because my candy drawer is so famous now that Grady will just walk into the room sometime and I'm like, what do you want? And he just opens up and he takes me. He'll know if it's new. He'll be like, you finished the other ones? And I'm like, yes, that. So yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay, I have one more question before we'll take other questions from the audience. You are a professional namer, and for a while I worked for you being a professional namer, and it was the most fun job I ever had. So I have to ask you about the beverage startup that Clementine's husband is funneling all his money into. And also the real estate copy that Clementine writes, which is also hilarious. So tell us about the beverage startup and how you came up with the name, which is actually it's not a good
It's not a good name.
But Gina will tell you why.
It's not good. It's just sort of 2 ideas crammed together. It's not very it's not very evocative. It's not very imaginative. Yeah, we do a lot of naming. You're the first person who actually thought, oh, you'd be a good namer. We were talking about it ages ago, and then I ended up really, you were naming and then I started naming on my own. And then we were doing projects together, which is really great. And I still I love doing the naming. I also write a lot of copy. And so I thought, I was trying to find ways to incorporate all these aspects of my life so that it didn't feel like I'm wearing all these different hats. Like if you're going to do all these other jobs, make the most of them. So,
right.
I gave these attributes to my character. And I also thought the copywriting was a really great way to express the difference between what Clementine was really feeling and what she was selling.
Right.
That's also something, that's also, there's an influencer character as well in the book and that's also another way of looking at that, what it appears to be, what it really is. And so, we're always marketing, we're always pitching, we're always selling. And I think that more and more than ever now. And so that was something that I wanted to examine on a variety of ways. And then with the real estate, I'm obsessed with real estate. My sister is an agent, my mother is an agent, my cousin's an architect. So I was like, I've got to put all of that open house time that I've spent looking at people's houses to good use. So here we go.
Can you tell us where people can see that wonderful animation you made about real estate? Is it on your website? Is it
on my Instagram? It's on my Instagram. So my Instagram is
Gina
just
Sorell.
At Gina Sorell. Yep. And that's a good reminder. I have to put it on my website.
Okay. I just want to read a few paragraphs of just one paragraph of this stuff. Nothing says I do like real estate. Not diamonds, not a fancy white dress you'll wear only once, not a party that eats up all your savings in a single day. No, nothing says I want a future with you, like owning a place together and building your loved one square foot at a time. What's so brilliant about this is you get this romanticized view of what real estate is, and then you sort of undercut it by saying, yeah, but you know what, you're a sucker because you don't own this home anymore because your husband took all the money. But back to Aquaveg, was that the term?
Aquaveg, yeah,
Aquaveg, yeah. Okay, Clementine's husband has this company called Aquaveg. Sounds really enticing, doesn't it? Did you come up with other names for that beside Aquaveg? I mean, what would you call it?
The first one that I just loved it. I was thinking, I think the real kicker for that one is it's carbonated vegetable juice. So,
I know. It's like,
there's all these delightful, lightly, hint is a lovely vegetable, cucumber flavored water, it's delicious. But I was thinking, what would carbonated kale taste like? What would carbonated tomato juice taste like? It had to be carbonated. And so I thought that was, and it's such an easy way to name it. I thought that was something Steve could come up with himself, right?
Right.
I'll put it together. Right. I'm a genius here. It's not an evocative name. So I had just a lot of fun with that. And, we've both worked so much in that field. And also I've worked so much with startups. And I've seen how they shift and they change and they grow. And as money comes in and funding comes in and interest changes, the actual company itself will constantly adapt and change and respond to where the market is.
Right. Karen is our wonderful producer and a short story writer. Do we have any questions for Gina? Yes. Is there a book or author that inspires you?
Yes, and I'm speaking to her right
I
now.
knew you were going to say that. I was going to
No,
say,
it's
don't
true.
see
No,
me. And
it's
I thought
true.
it was
No, it's
self-serving.
true. Oh, that was good. I didn't mute when I was coughing, just afterwards. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not kidding. I'm really not kidding, because I think that, you've done something which I've always wanted to be able to do. And I think that you do it so brilliantly is once the reader gets involved with the characters in your world, I've always described it to other people as it's almost like it's just almost like a tsunami, like it's just sort of in a good way, but like it's just this whirlwind, like I'm completely in and I'm enveloped and I'm like in this world, and it almost feels like it's swirling around me and I'm completely immersed and caught up in it.
I love
And
that. Thank you.
and it's something which, has always been really inspiring, that ability to really just go for it on the page and take the reader with you.
Thank you so much.
That's good.
Oh, what writing advice would you give to your younger self? Oh, great question.
It's a great question. I would say it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
So I would just set expectations for myself. It's funny because in acting, we always say an overnight success is 10 years. And that was drilled into me from the time that I was very, very young. And it was true. I started, I had other success, but I had sort of big success after 10 years of studying. So I would say that it's going to take a long time. And you can't control the market. You can't control what people are going to respond to. You can only control what you put on the page.
That's true. Any last question, Karen? If not, I have one.
Yes.
Okay. I want to know, what are the wise women doing today now that they've gone through all this? How is their life? See, you made these real characters. I have to know.
No, that's true. You know what? Things are good for them. Things are good for them. I see them pursuing their new paths, with more ease, and they're with less trepidation, with less anxiety, with more trust, with more confidence. I feel like they're all wiser than they were before. And they, I think, have a bit more balance than they had before as well, because they've recognized the cost of devoting themselves entirely to their career or devoting themselves entirely to being successful. And there's this, I think they're kinder and they're gentler with themselves and with each other as well.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's been here. And I want to remind you, Mothers and Other Strangers, just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. It was also a Women's Natural Book Association Great Group read. Reading with Jenna, Good Morning America Pick, The Wise Women. Both wonderful, wonderful books. Gina is a wonderful, wonderful author and a wonderful, wonderful person and my friend. And I'm so happy to have you here,
happy
Gina.
to be the first guest.
So we'll see you all later. You can always, this interview is going to live on our Mighty Blazes YouTube station forever and ever and ever. So you can just keep watching it and watching it and watching it. And tell your friends. But honestly, The Wise Women, fabulous book. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.